I'm Scott Hansen, host of NFL Red Zone. Lowe's knows Sundays hit different when you earn them. We've got you covered with outdoor power equipment from Cobalt and everything you need to weatherproof your deck with Trex decking. Plus, with lawn care from Scott's and, of course, Pit Boss grills and accessories, you can get a home field advantage all season long. So get to Lowe's, get it done, and earn your Sunday. Lowe's, official partner of the NFL.
This episode is brought to you by Paranormal Playback, a new podcast where hosts Shar, Mel and Laura recap the spooky and entertaining world of paranormal reality TV. Each week they take a fresh look at popular shows like Ghost Adventures and Kindred Spirits, blending humour with insight as they pull apart what's happening on screen. The three of them are a mix of believers and skeptics, which makes for really fun conversations, sometimes leaning into mystery, other times asking the questions viewers might be thinking themselves. With their background in creative production, they know how these shows are put together, so they're great at pointing out the moments that feel real versus the ones that might be more for the cameras. And their segment, This Old Haunt, digs into the true crime side of paranormal investigations, separating fact from fiction. With Halloween coming up, it's the perfect time to add something spooky, funny and a little addictive to your playlist. For even more spooky, ghostly, paranormal content with a humorous spin, go check out Paranormal Playback. Hello and welcome back to another episode of Scary. I'm your host Will, and each week I narrate your paranormal encounters. Before we get into this week's episode, I want to say special thanks to our new Patreon subscribers who are Emma Harris, Connor Cross, Maria, Christy Kinsler, Lottie Watson, Greg, Naomi Parry, Alexandra Hayes Reynolds, Jane Redmond, Lindsay, Jackie and Carly Wilkinson. Honestly, thanks so much for signing up to the Patreon. It really does mean a lot, and if this is something that you're interested in, you can find the link in this episode's show notes, where for $5 a month you gain access to ad-free main episodes and exclusive Patreon only scary episodes. But now let's get into our next paranormal experience. 2 years ago, something very strange happened to me. My partner and I bought a modest semi-detached house in a quiet estate in the northeast of England. I guess you could say it was the kind of place where your neighbours nod politely but don't pry too much. The area where the house was at the very end of the cul-de-sac, so it was pretty quiet where we lived. On the Facebook residents group, the most scandalous thing was someone's bin gone missing. When we first moved in, a few people warned us about the occasional bit of antisocial behaviour. It mainly happened up the top of the estate, the type of thing like teenagers drinking in alleyways and the odd broken window, loud arguments after the local pub had shut. But it wasn't really anything to worry about. It sounded worse than what it actually was. And like I said, we never had any of that trouble where we lived. The first week was spent with the usual unpacking, wrestling with flat pack furniture and arguing over where things should go. Of course, I always lost. My partner is ever the planner, and I had measured every room down to the last inch. I guess you could say I took a more relaxed approach, meaning I mostly nodded while they made decisions. I remember by the end of that week, the place was starting to feel like home. I should say that I'm a very bad sleeper, and I quickly noticed that there was something a little bit strange about the estate at night, something I couldn't really put my finger on. During the day, it was just this normal quiet row of houses. But at night, once the world had kind of settled in, it just looked empty. Maybe I think too much. But it just felt like nobody lived there. It was very strange. I think it's a bit of a hangover from always living in a city and being used to the hustle and bustle of everything outside. A few days after we had moved in, one night at around 2:30 in the morning, I was wide awake. I suffer from bouts of insomnia. It's been like that for as long as I can remember, and it's not anxiety or stress, just a strange wired energy that keeps me awake. My partner, of course, was fast asleep beside me, their breath slow and heavy. I'd envy how they would be able to drift off to sleep so easily. It used to take me ages. I remember lying there, staring at the ceiling, willing myself to try fall asleep, count sheep, all that stuff. And it just got worse, to the point where I knew I needed to get up out of the bed. And I did. I went downstairs in my socks, headed to the kitchen, and I remember the whole house being silent. As I reached the bottom of the stairs, something caught my attention. I could see outside that there was this really bright moonlight that was shining in our front door window. Outside, the entire street was bathed in this bright moonlight, and every house, every car, every tree was so clear. And there was the moon hanging full and huge. I should have known. I never sleep well during a full moon. I kind of looked around, taking in the estate in this weird light. And as I looked across the street, I saw him. There was a man standing upstairs in the window directly across from our house. He looked to be completely still, and I could tell it was a man because his silhouette was framed against the light of the hallway behind him, which was spilling in. Something about the shadow of him made my skin crawl, because the curtains weren't drawn and it looked like he was looking directly at me, but I couldn't be sure of that. Couldn't see his face. The details of him were kind of lost in the shadow. I could just see that he was quite tall, quite thin, standing perfectly upright, and his arms just loosely hanging either side of him. I stayed watching him for a while, just slightly hanging back, and he didn't really show any signs of movement at all, which was very strange. He was perfectly motionless. And for a while I thought maybe, was this like some sort of mannequin or something that the neighbours have in their house? And then I started thinking, well, how long has this guy been standing there? By chance I had woken up and come downstairs, and there was no lights on in our house, only the back kitchen, which wouldn't have drawn any attention, if that makes sense. Maybe he was just looking outside at the moonlight too, lost in thought or something. And I guess that thought wasn't that weird. I was kind of doing the same thing. After a while I stepped away from the window and headed back upstairs. Of course I couldn't resist, and I looked out the window of our bedroom and he was still there. So I just shut the curtains and finally went to sleep. The next morning I woke up quite early and the curtains in his house were closed. At some point he must have stopped looking. I guess that should have reassured me, but it didn't. It kind of made me feel worse, because if he was watching for hours last night, looking directly at our house, then at what point did he decide to stop, and why? And yeah, the thought did cross my mind, maybe he's just some lonely old guy who had trouble sleeping, like me. Maybe I was just being paranoid. It was a new house, a new street. Maybe everything just felt a little off because I wasn't used to it yet. I didn't tell my partner because it wasn't really much to tell. 3 times over the next 2 weeks, always at night, always in the same place, and always perfectly still. He was there. By the 3rd time I saw him, I had started checking the window on purpose. I told myself I wasn't obsessed. I was. Just a passing glance whenever I went downstairs for a drink or to check that the front door was locked. But the truth was, I was looking for him. Every time I saw the curtains closed during the day, I felt a strange sense of relief, like maybe this time he had stopped. Maybe I wouldn't see him again. And some nights I didn't see him. But then the next night, the night would fall and there he'd be, still watching. It was so weird. A few nights passed and I had another bad episode of sleeplessness. I had gone downstairs for water, trying to ignore the itching feeling in my skull that told me to check the window, but I did. I always did. And this time it was different. There was 2 of them, which made me catch my breath in my throat. Standing just behind the man's right shoulder was a second figure, a woman, small, kind of hunched, and she was dressed in something loose which caught the light behind her. She wasn't in shadow like he was. I could make out the soft contours of her face and her wispy short grey hair. You could clearly see the curve of her shoulders, and they both were standing there motionless, which was really bizarre. There was no interaction. They weren't even looking at each other. They were just standing there. I thought it must be his wife finally joining him at the window. Maybe that's why he stood there every night. Maybe he was waiting for her. I watched them both motionless in their bedroom for a good few minutes, and after a while I went back up to bed. Just as I turned and put my foot on the first step of the stairs, I heard a sharp voice, muffled by the distance between us, and then another voice. It was too hard to make out what they were saying. And then I heard this unmistakable sound of something smashing. It was like something inside their house had snapped. This murmuring turned into shouting, and not just raised voices, but furious, guttural, raw shouting. And then there was this really loud crash. Glass. By now I was stood frozen in our own sitting room window with shallow breath. I had no idea what was happening, but One thing was clear, whatever was happening inside the house wasn't normal. Maybe a domestic dispute, maybe was the old woman in danger? Had I been watching this abusive situation unfold all this time and didn't realise it? Some of the screams that were coming from the house were chilling, and I grabbed the phone and called the police. I waited by the door for the police to arrive, keeping my eyes pretty much locked on the house across the street, and the shouting continued, rising and falling in waves, sometimes with these noises that were borderline growls, like deep guttural roars, and then there'd be silence, and then there'd be high-pitched noises that sounded like they were from a female, and I could not make out what they were shouting about as much as I listened. And weirdly, the whole house was in darkness at this stage, so all this noise was coming from this empty looking house. The two officers finally arrived, and I stepped out to the porch to greet them. I showed them which house the noise was coming from, and they heard the noises as well. So they knocked on the front door firmly, and there was no answer. They knocked again, louder this time, nothing. And then through the stillness there was this faint sound from inside, this low kind of muttering. And then the door slightly opened, and I couldn't see the person who was at the other side. Bearing in mind, we know nobody on this estate. We're only just after moving in here. I didn't even know the next door neighbours at this point. So after what felt like an eternity, these two figures emerged from the doorway. They were looking down the street in one direction, and when I turned I could see that there was an ambulance on its way coming. And some of the ambulance crew made their way inside, and after not too long, a few figures emerged supporting this old man between him, who looked frail and very unsteady on his feet and pale. His eyes were wild, and he didn't look in his right mind. But there was no sign of his wife. I stepped forward and asked, "Is he okay?" And one of the officers nodded. He said he's confused, but he's not hurt. And then I said, "What about his wife, or the woman?" And he frowned and said, "What woman?" And that sent a chill through me that felt like ice water, because I had definitely seen another person with him, an elderly woman in the bedroom, and she must be in the house somewhere. And I said, "Oh, I saw a woman in the window with him." And as it then turned out, they knew this man very well, and they had been called out on multiple occasions to the estate previously. They said, "Listen, we'll check the house again, but there's nobody there." And they did. They checked the whole house and said that nobody had gotten in because all the windows were secure, and the back kitchen door was locked from the inside with the key in it. If somebody was there, they would have came out the front door, and you would have seen them shouting on the street. I knew what I had seen. The woman had definitely been there. And at this point, the officer was moving away and was talking to the paramedics, and I was standing there thinking, there's somebody else in this house. And then just as they were about to close one of the doors on the ambulance, the old man turned his head and locked his eyes onto mine, and for a moment he looked lucid again, and he opened his mouth, and without his lips barely moving, he said to me, "She won't let me rest." When he said those words, they slid down my spine like a blade. They took him away that night. I presume he was taken into some sort of care setting. Some of the neighbours said that his son didn't live in the country anymore, and that the man had been suffering from some sort of dementia. The house is still currently empty. To be honest, I have been avoiding looking at that house if I can't sleep at night, because all the curtains are wide open, and I know I saw somebody else in that house with that man. I saw what I think was his wife, or the spirit of his wife, and I cannot get her silhouette out of my brain. The details of her hair, what she was wearing, the whole thing is very creepy. Thank you to Grant for sending in his paranormal experience. You know, I thought as time would go on I would become more and more desensitized to people's paranormal experiences, but I don't know why I do. I always record these at nighttime, which makes things way worse. If you have your own paranormal encounter or very strange encounter, you can send it to scaryaparanormalpodcast@gmail.com, and it might just get read out on the show. Thank you so much to everybody who sent in their paranormal experiences. I am going through them, and I know I've reached out to some of you guys who've sent them to say thanks and just to acknowledge that they would get featured on the show. Don't forget to hit the follow button wherever you listen to the podcast so you don't miss out on any future episodes. And lastly, thank you so much for telling your friends about the show, for spreading the word, for listening, everything. You can join the Facebook group and the Instagram page. The links are in this episode show notes. And other than that, join me next time for another episode of Scary.
Trimble is the technology company that connects your physical and digital worlds so industries like transportation and geospatial can get hard work done faster than ever. Every day brings new challenges, decisions, adjustments, real-time moments that matter. With Trimble on your team, you're in command of purpose-built tech ecosystems and connected solutions that keep work flowing end to end. Turn data points into decision points, deadlines into finish lines, and possibilities into profits. Check out what Trimble can do for you at Trimble.com. Because with Trimble, you can act smarter, move faster, and lead with confidence. Trimble, confidence at every turn.